Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Arise Festival event. My name's Matthew, and I'm the one of the national volunteer organisers for Arise, and we'd like to welcome you all here today for this discussion on how can the left win, which is James Schneider and Laura Smith in conversation. I'd just like to quickly update people on the festival as a whole. This is, I think, about the 12th event in over 20 taking place at this year's festival. We've had tens of thousands of you sign up and join it at different ones each week. And if you haven't checked out the whole programme in one of the links that will be posted, you can see a link tree with all the different sessions still to come. And you can also still buy a ticket for the festival as a whole, which is very important in terms of paying for our digital infrastructure costs for such an ambitious project. We've been particularly pleased to see such a positive response to these more informal lefty lunchtime sessions, as we call them, and Sunday screenings as well. So it's great to have people joining us today. And if you enjoyed this one today and you haven't joined other events at the festival, check out our YouTube channel, then you can watch them back as well, especially when you have to stay inside during this massive heat wave over the next week. So what the format is today is we'll first hear from James Schneider and then from Laura Smith, and then there'll be plenty of time for you to put any questions to them. Please put them in the YouTube chat, and then they'll be passed on to me to give to our panelists. So as I said, on this discussion today on how can the left win, our first speaker is James Schneider. He'd have been known to many of you when he was the co-founder of Momentum, but he's also worked for Jeremy Corbyn in his comms team, worked on a number of international important issues, including with the excellent Progressive International, and now has an upcoming book called Our Bloc on these issues of how can the left win. So without any further ado, I'll move over to James to introduce.
Thank you very much, Matt. And thank you everyone for joining this lunchtime and taking part in this amazing festival. And huge credit to Matt and everybody else at the Arise team for putting on just such a massive amount of great stuff for all of us. I'm going to start going back a little bit in time, but not too much in time, to the 2008 financial crisis, because basically since then, the political and economic system has struggled to reproduce itself. That's why there's so much political volatility. Look back at the last 15 years. In most countries in the global north, more like weird, surprising political events have happened than in the preceding almost 50 years. And life for most people has been getting harder and harder year after year. And so, we, as in Corbyn and Labour, we didn't lose the 2019 election because people were happy with the system, because suddenly after 10 years of wages going down and austerity, they decided actually everyone was really happy with how things were. But Boris Johnson was able to channel some of that anger that there is in the system, but to use that to prop it up. And he had an opportunity. He did have an opportunity to try to shore up the support that the public can have, that people can have, and trust in our political and economic system. And it was always going to be extremely difficult because how do you do levelling up without taking stuff away from the people that pay for the Conservative Party when a third of British billionaires have donated to the Conservative Party? And so, as was fairly predictable, Boris Johnson failed to level up. He failed to restore public support in the system. And so now we're going to see our fourth Tory Prime Minister in 6 years. This is, again, the same volatility because they can't fix the underlying crisis that's taking place in the system. They don't have any tools or ideas for what to do. And we know that because we can see, what are they arguing about in their leadership debate right now? They're doing some sort of weird race to the bottom on trans rights and talking about tax cuts that couldn't possibly happen, or returning to austerity. I mean, that's as far as they go. But unfortunately, the opposition isn't really providing much either. And so, what is the crisis that we're all facing? It's really simple. You don't have to be, you don't have to study politics or economics or anything to get what the crisis is. We can see it. It's all going up. Everything's going up. Groceries going up, bills going up, rent going up, mortgage and debt repayments going up. You also know what else is going up, which is the wealth of the billionaires, the profits of big business, the CO2 we pump into our atmosphere, and the temperature of our planet. All those things are going up. The only thing that isn't going up is people's pay. Now, almost everybody in the country is experiencing the same thing, and they know that. And we also know another thing, which is that it's not our fault. We didn't cause this. It wasn't, people going out to work, nurses or doctors or plumbers. I mean, these people didn't cause it. It wasn't the hotel cleaner didn't cause it. And that's why so many people are just saying, no, they're not going to take it anymore. And that's what's bubbling up. I think that's what's going to bubble up over the end of this summer and into the autumn. And we're already seeing it. Of course, we saw it with the RMT strikes, but actually in sector after sector, workers are using their unions to stop bosses from cutting pay. We're also seeing thousands of ordinary people sick with worry about the future of our planet, protesting against dirty fossil fuels and taking more and more civil disobedience and direct action. We've already got in this country 1 million people who can't pay their energy bills, and many, many more will refuse to pay when they go up to over £3,000 a year on the 1st of October. Renters are coming together to resist evictions and preparing to withhold their rent from landlords if it comes to it. And in every community, what we saw during the COVID pandemic, people supporting each other, mutual aid and solidarity networks, those are still here, and those are coming back in a big way because we can see the need in every community. And that's what people mainly want to do. Most people, they don't want to walk by on the other side. They don't want to say, I'm all right, down with them. People want to help each other out. And that's actually that's what we should have learned from the pandemic. And that's what we could learn and can learn now. And also what has been, I think, really encouraging and extremely important to see is while the government are trying to shift attention and scapegoat migrants and refugees for the crisis that we face, loads of people are just not having it. You can just see people who are fed up of being told that they have to be vicious to other people to survive. And so we've seen people stopping deportations, blocking the police. Their flight out to Rwanda didn't have any, the first one they had couldn't even put anybody on the flight. And that's what's going on. Because I think the majority of people in the country, the overwhelming majority of people in the country can see now that the rich and the politicians are trying to make everyone else pay for the crisis. And, we're not having, we've already been down that road. We had that in 2010 to 2015, we had austerity, and that spell has been broken. So loads of stuff is happening, but what can we do? How can we win? So ultimately, we do need state power. This is absolutely true. If anyone tells you that the left doesn't need state power, they're wrong. Unfortunately, we don't have that luxury. We've got a vanishingly small number of days to do anything meaningful about climate breakdown. The statistics are terrifying. And we also seen the power of the state in the pandemic to prop up the wealth of the very richest. The 4 biggest central banks in the world in March 2020, they coordinated to pump $9 trillion into the global economy. And they didn't pump that into your pockets, and they didn't pump that into, the needs that people had. It mainly went to prop up the wealth of the already wealthy, which is why billionaire wealth in the pandemic, in a global recession, went up 50%, because the state gave them that money. So if anyone says we don't need the state, that's wrong. We need the state. But arguing about whether the Labour Party can be the vehicle right now to get us there, yes or no, isn't getting us anywhere. and we don't have an enormous ability to act in it. But where we do have the ability to act, as we can see, is how are people resisting what's going on now? What are people doing in their trade unions? What are these acts of defiance that people are engaging in? And this autumn, people will strike, they will boycott, and they will occupy for their chance to live. And these acts of defiance, these are the traditional acts of defiance that people have always used when they have been pushed upon and pushed down on by the ruling class. So I think that our task right now is to take these different acts of defiance. They might be already collective acts of defiance in the trade union. They might be lonely acts of defiant desperation. I just can't pay this bill. I'm not gonna pay this bill. They might be someone doing a protest on their own or with their 5 friends against a bank that's funding climate change. Who knows what it is? But there's going to be loads of it. And our task is not only to stimulate more of it, but to unite it and to bring it together so that we can help each other stand up and be counted and turn these lonely cries that we've all had. I'm sure we've all felt, depression and desperation and sadness and confusion and being alone over the last couple of years. But we can turn those together into collective power. So my argument, Matt very kindly plugged my book, which is called Our Bloc, How We Win. It's out in September. That I argue for a formal and active left bloc to try to bring all of these things together. So what that means is we try to bring together all the different parts of the left and progressive movements as much as we can. It's not into a new party. It doesn't need to be into a new organization, but to advance how we coordinate and how we act together. So what does that mean? That means that the trade unions are coordinating with climate activists, with Black Lives Matter, with the anti-racist movement, with feminist movements, with the peace and anti-war movement. Those are in collaboration with and solidarity with the exciting single issue campaigns that we're also part of that are making strides. And that those are all linked up with the left in the Labour Party, both in its grassroots, in Momentum and in other organisations, and those elected representatives that we have, because they are our voice in politics. And I don't just mean in Westminster, we also have in the Assembly in Wales, in Holyrood, and also in local government. And we've got also some great metro mayors as well. We will need all these forces together to be amplifying each other, to be working together, because the system is in stress. The Tories don't have an answer. We can see that. And at the moment, we can't just hope that Westminster is going to sort it for us. That has actually never happened. Not once in history does everyone just sit back and the nicer politicians sort it out. No, you need the better politicians in alliance with the popular movements, the trade unions, the social movements to force things through. So in short, my argument is the thing that we can all do is we can get involved with the different things that are going on, do as much as we can to spread solidarity and coordination between them. If you are in a climate group and you know that there's a strike going on nearby, get down there and support them. That solidarity will come back to you in droves when you need it. And we can work within our organizations, either publicly or quietly, so that they can all work together more, so that we can turn this autumn of action into something much, much bigger. And then at some point, hopefully very soon, we'll also then have a political vehicle, but not like how we had when Jeremy was the leader of the Labour Party, where we did a lot of great things. But our movements, we were still quite weak. We were coming off the back of 40 years of decline for the left, for the trade union movement, and some excellent social movement activism, but it wasn't all knitted together. I think we have a chance now. We're bigger, we're stronger. If we can bring it all together, then there will be opportunities for us also politically, which we can take. And that way we can improve people's lives right now. People, this is the biggest fall of living standards since records began, and we can point to a much better future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, James, for those thoughts. I've got a few things I might add in, but I think what I'll do is go straight to Laura. But what I would say to people is, I can see you all watching there on the YouTube. Plenty of people on there, but not too many questions or points in the chat. Do please put stuff in the chat. Doesn't have to be questions. Put your comments on what the speakers and others are saying and what other people are saying in the chat. We definitely want to hear from you and get your thoughts on some of these interesting ideas that James is putting forward. So I now move on to Laura Smith. Won't need much introduction, I'm sure, to many of you. Former MP, councillor, writer of that very important No Holding Back report, and community campaigner, and much more besides. Pleasure to have you with us again today, Laura.
Unmute myself, that would be a good start. It's so nice to be joining you at lunchtime, and thank you for having me. I've even got my actual lunch. I've got my Ribena here. I wanted to see what James had for his lunch, actually. Thought we'd maybe get into the discussions, the ins and outs of these important matters, but I agree with everything that James said, and hopefully I can build a bit on the points that he made, but he covered so much. I don't want to repeat because I want to hear from the listeners and hear the questions that are hopefully going to start coming in. I definitely agree with the last point that James was making about basically looking beyond Labour in Parliament. We do have power in lots of places, and we need to start using that properly, really kind of thinking how we can work with, put pressure on those politicians at a local level in order to move forward to the politics that we want to see. I mean, we also at some point need to start thinking about how we're going to push back about the fact that the Parliamentary Labour Party has shifted so far to the right. As the left, we can't just allow this kind of thing to happen. We do have a conference, we are a party of members, and I sort of just hear more and more things that don't make me particularly happy as a member of the Labour Party and as a councillor. I think scrapping the manifestos of 2017 and 2019, why? These are the start of solutions that are desperately needed. As James was saying, the crisis that the country is facing, that we're facing across the world, that these things aren't disappearing, it's intensifying, it's getting worse. And so the solutions have to be more radical. It's certainly clinging on to the status quo or trying to sort of claw back to some sort of nostalgic vision of what the 90s were. It just isn't going to cut it. People want solutions, they want hope, they want vision, and we can start to offer that. And I think in certain areas with certain politicians, they see that and they're starting to do it. And what we need to do is really start to work together to push back against some of the, quite frankly, lazy politics that seems to be going on in some parts of the Parliamentary Labour Party. We do have to rebuild from the grassroots up. The Corbyn movement, that moment, it has gone. It was always about far more than, it was about the ideas, it was about the policies. We need to make sure that we stay very focused on the fact that those policies, the solutions we had, were popular, that these things can't just disappear. We certainly can't go back to being quiet in the corner of rooms, feeling ashamed because we identify as socialists, not feeling brave to be able to stand up and push back. Now more than ever we have to, because we are the ones, as I've said, with solutions to some of these crises. I mean, if we look at how we can start to do that, again, I agree with what James was saying. We need to bring together organisations, but we also need to start looking outwards more at places where we haven't necessarily been talking. I did an absolutely bang on brilliant meeting recently. I was invited to go and speak at the Wisterson WI meeting. Never spoken at one before, had kind of an image of probably of what I was going to be walking into. There were 90 women in that place with all different ideas, politics. The politics was good. They wanted the political discussion, but we need to be talking to people who we haven't necessarily been engaging with. And that's essential. And that is where the role that we can play in the community is so key. And we need to start building on that, and also trying to link in and tie in the class consciousness that goes with that. I do a lot of work in the community in my role as a councillor. I work with people who haven't been involved in the movement, and we're on kind of, it sounds so cheesy, on a journey, because that's also sounds a little bit patronizing. It isn't that, but what we do and what I'm doing is working with them, and they are politically educating themselves as they're getting involved in the community. They're starting to see for themselves the barriers that are in place. They're seeing the hurdles that are put there and who is really controlling that. So I think with regards to community organising, that has to be done alongside the organisations we're talking about. It should be done very much so linked in with the trade unions. I want to see us rebuilding these fighting unions. It's been an absolute pleasure to watch what's been, I mean, not the circumstances, but to watch authentic voices like Mick Lynch, like Dave Ward, getting onto the news and being able to put across these very clear facts that the reason that people are having to protest, it's not because they're greedy, it's because the bosses are greedy. The profits that are being made are grotesque. They are pointing out the fact that this is simply not a fair fight. And the thing that's been wonderful to see is that the public are more on board than ever before, I think. You can see that in the polling that was done around it. I hear across kind of my friendship groups who aren't particularly political support for what is happening, and actually more people wanting to see more of it in different sectors. And we are going to see more action being taken. Because look, the politicians, they're not going to do it unless the pressure is put on them. We've seen that. There's no point waiting around. The problem is too great. People need help now. We've got a wages and earnings crisis in this country. And it is going to be down to us building at the grassroots. We need to strengthen the level of organisation. We need to be campaigning, linked in with the communities. We need to be working with organisers. We need to make people understand the importance of collective action. We need to re-educate people on the purpose of a trade union. For too long, it's just been seen as an insurance policy. No, we need to be saying to people, and I have these conversations all the time, that they have to be part of a collective fight. That is the way that we win. And talk to them about the history of the labour movement, the fact that lots of the things that we take for granted now, such as weekends, came from people taking these fights. The ruling class don't just hand over. So we need to build that pressure. And I think another thing that James touched on, which I definitely agree, it's the isolation. And they will want people to feel isolated. They will want people to start to feel ashamed if they're struggling financially, so that they can't talk about it. All this nonsense that sort of drips out of, well, people should be cancelling their Netflix subscriptions, or maybe, you know, if they'd just saved a bit harder or been a bit more sensible, they would have a lovely big house by now. We need to push back against that, because it is absolute nonsense. We need to make it so it's not embarrassing for people to admit that they're struggling. Instead, be open and frank with one another, offer the support, and build the fight back with them. I think things like that have been coming up, such as like Strike Map, are really good. People can find out where things are happening. I think linking into the trade unions, social media, things like the People's Assembly, of course, all of these things, yourselves, Matt, are really important to kind of share what's going on, share the information, and we need to be also sharing where we do win, because there are wins that do take place and do happen, and we need to make sure that the wider movement and public do hear about it. I think one thing that I would add in is this kind of, we need to ditch the culture war, right? I think the left needs to unite around the cost of living crisis. I think everything that we do should be about fighting against that, fighting for better wages, holding to account the people who have been taking this money, taking the vast majority of the wealth in this country, the fact that it's so unequal now, and that's just been getting worse. And what we need to make sure is that we're more disciplined at not getting dragged into the gutter with regards to race, age, the region, you know, the whole north versus south stuff, sex, sexuality. We need to make sure that we're punching up, right, at the people who are actually causing these problems, not punching at each other. And I think too often you see it where, unfortunately, we all start falling out with each other. And I would just like to see a bit more kind of togetherness. For example, and I'm going to, this is something that I was told the other day, and it really did make me think, is it particularly useful when people start using language such as boomers and gammon and this kind of thing? Or are we immediately, when people do that, are they immediately isolating people and pushing them away? And then do we then run the risk of them looking for solutions elsewhere when we are the ones who have it? So I think the left as a whole needs to maybe become a little bit more disciplined. And that goes with the older generation as well. Sometimes it's quite easy for us to think that the younger generation are going to be leading the way, and the older generation we've had all these, you know, issues. But we need to just keep focused that the problem here is capitalism. That is the problem. And it's the capitalist class who are wedded to this economic model, and we must keep focused on that. Have you put you wanted me to start winding up, Matt? Yeah, just give me a minute and then I will, I promise. I think we need to start looking at the left-wing ideas that some people have been doing, how we can build hubs in the community. We need to certainly be looking at building our own institutions, because the ones that we have aren't operating in the interests of us. So our own media platforms, etc., which some of them are doing really well, and I hope to see those grow. Trade unions is the way to be able to do that too, by linking in with those, doing more work alongside bringing the media, the trade unions together. And yeah, I think I'm feeling the pressure that I'm talking too much, Matt, and there's probably questions, so I'm gonna wrap up and hand back over to you.
Thanks, Laura. That was great. I could listen to both our excellent speakers all day. It's great to see over 150 of you genuinely live watching us now at lunchtime. I don't know what Rishi Sunak would think about all these people watching a Lefty stream at lunchtime, but it's certainly heartening this end to see those numbers and to see the questions and chat coming in. I think, as is often the case, what I would say is there's a lot that questions and comments about this issue of whether we should stay in the Labour Party or not, whether we should form a new party. And I don't want to sort of focus the whole discussion on that, but I would like the two speakers to sort of address it. In terms of like how Arise and the people involved with Arise see this question, I think we've had to say that we're all in the Labour Party and we're not going to sort of run off from the Labour Party while we're in it, but we don't think it's the be all and end all. And I think we need to be focused far more on the kind of James and Laura have been talking on, as well as internal things, because also that can bring the pressure inside the Labour Party to change, like it has done at other times in history too. Like I thought it was quite interesting actually to see some MPs who you might not have expected to defying the sort of instruction from Starmer about visiting the picket lines. That was something happening in the external world, but then impacted on the situation in Parliament and the Labour Party. Other questions we've got here. and a good comment as well. So the comment, I'll go first. For all the issues that still exist with them, local government and devolved administrations increasingly seem to be offering more of an alternative to the economic model of the last 40 years, which I think is something James sort of mentioned. A good point here from a question from Rachel Burnett on YouTube. How do we energise ourselves and each other when so many people are fighting so hard just to keep food on the table and the bills paid? How can we spark hope and nurture it? A quite specific question here for James, which I'm not quite sure where the person's getting at, but I'm going to ask it. Zach on YouTube says, were there any ideas or stories that you came across while researching the book that you then had to leave out? And then a final question, sort of basically I'm sort of bringing this together on some of the comments, is how can you sort of have a unified left whilst respecting disagreements? As someone said to me the other day, it's about sort of diverse and disciplined, which I thought was quite a nice way of looking at. So there's quite a lot of food for thought there. So I'll go back to James first and then to Laura, and then hopefully we'll be able to take another round of your questions and comments as well. So please do keep posting them on that YouTube chat.
Great set of questions. So quickly on Labour, I broadly agree with you, Matt. In our electoral system, it's extraordinarily difficult to supplant the Labour Party as the main party of anti-Tory votes. So unless you have the social weight to do that, i.e. you've got trade unions, you've got social movements, you've got hundreds of thousands of activists, you've got political leaders who are ready to do that, then I think it's been shown again and again and again to be a dead end. So I mean, I'm a member of the Labour Party. I'm staying in the Labour Party, but it doesn't occupy, you know, the latest outrage from Sir Keir Starmer QC. It doesn't occupy my brain too much, because I don't think that you know, he is going to be advancing the class struggle from a Marxist perspective, or whatever it was that Paul Mason said. So I think it's more important to bring our forces together, because the thing that we know is that things can't go on the way that they are, which means that there will be new openings and new opportunities for the left and for progressive forces. And the other thing that we know is that how strong we are and how united we are across our different movements and forces will strongly impact whether we're able to advance when whatever that opening happens. So I think that should be our focus. On the question of what can we do when people are struggling to pay the bills and put food on the table, I think that's what I was trying to get at with this idea of turning what are currently individual acts of like misery and desperation into collective acts of defiance. So if we already have 1 million people who can't pay their energy bills, and that's going to go up, how do we build a campaign so that those people are not alone? They're not 1 million individuals, but they are a collective that is then putting big pressure on both the government and the energy companies. So, for example, there's this Don't Pay campaign, which is going to start on October the 1st, which is to get people to not pay their energy bills when the prices go up. Now, that can turn people's people's desperation into strength, into a way in which they can act. And so, you know, again and again in everything, it's about organizing to be collective. If we can bring together all of the attacks that people are facing, then they can demonstrate their power. And on just one quick thing on the respecting disagreements point, and it goes a bit to what Laura was saying about keeping focused. I think this kind of, you know, coalitional left bloc approach that I'm calling for, it's not trying to create a new line, a new party line with a new discipline that everybody follows like that. It's really it's not actually about some of the political arguments that people have on the left so much. It's about doing things. It's what are the things that we can do together, as long as we don't disagree with the thing that, like, do we support the railway workers going on strike? Yes, we do. We support their struggle. Should we then sit down and have a blow-by-blow argument with their representatives in the trade union about all the different political lines that they've ever taken and we've ever taken? Absolutely not. We need to be able to hold political disagreements just in place. They're fine, they can carry on, but they should take place in the appropriate venue. And right now we need to act. We need to act. We don't need to argue. We don't need to be super intellectual about it. We just need to see, like, here is where our opponents are weak, and these people, let's say the RMT is doing something. I'm a climate activist. What can I do to help to advance their struggle and my struggle at the same time? And I think that is the way in which we can begin to move forward. Focus on action rather than on points of disagreement. If we're disagreeing about action, if we don't think that trade unions are a good thing, okay, well then that's a fundamental issue. But I don't think that that's where we are right now. I've spent the last 2-3 months since I've finished writing this book talking to people across the left, trade unions, social movements, and so on. And the thing that I found actually is kind of almost regardless of what political culture they come from, if it's a bit more anarchist, if it's a bit more traditional labour movement, if it's a bit more this, that, or the other, people can see almost everyone can see two things. And this makes me extremely hopeful. Thing number one is that the climate crisis and the cost of living crisis are the same thing. Right, the whole thing, they're intimately related. They're one crisis, and we're suffering from a really big systemic structural crisis that can't be solved with one little thing here, one little thing there. Basically, everyone agrees with that. And the other thing that basically everyone agrees on is that we've got to work together. That we have to have people who maybe 5 years ago wouldn't have been able to see commonalities with each other, perhaps certain types of climate direct activists with certain types of trade unionists or something, but that we need to unite these forces, because this is what we have, and the crisis that we face is so pressing, and the need that we have to do is so great that we have to come together and act. So I think that's how we handle we handle disagreements. We hold them together, because when you're doing something together, it's much more difficult to turn around and say, well, actually, I disagree with you on the 4th bullet point of the statement that you put out 3 weeks ago.
Thanks, James. And just before I go to Law, I'm just going to read out a couple of comments. I've got one saying that they're involved locally with something called Barnet Collective, and they distribute free food to nearly 50 families in Barnet, and linked to this, they have a community allotment giving its fruit now. And that's quite interesting, because you get these initiatives similar to the mutual aid initiatives that came up in COVID, when the government was failing to provide the support needed, communities and people themselves sort of organising to do it. And then another one, just sort of commenting on something James said about paying bills. Nationwide payment strikes, united we stand, divided we fall. So thanks for your questions and comments. Laura?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was answered then. With regards to the Labour Party question, I'm in the Labour Party, I'm a Labour councillor, and I will continue to do what I have been doing, what our local members and activists have agree with, and keep going with that. But I'm like James, I try and not let it fill too much of my space. It's the Labour movement, building that I'm really interested in. I put my energy in, because I just don't want to be sucked into something that is a waste of time, to be quite frank. I think that sort of leads on to how I feel as well about how we need to be looking at the new economic model, like you said, Matt. And I do really believe that we have to start being brave with this stuff. And again, there's disagreements on how this will look and how we take it forward, but we need to be having these conversations, because at the moment the system is like a rigged casino game, right? And we need to be building power across what we do have, like James was saying. I think we should be looking at how we can build you know, cooperatives, how we are looking at how councils, the procurement, we need to be pushing against privatisation, all of these things, hopefully we can agree on, and showing solidarity to strikers. And I totally agree with what James said about, I don't want to dissect the personality of every person who is going up on the TV, but I do want to see them achieve a pay increase for the people who they're representing. That's what matters. I think we just need to remember why we call ourselves socialists as well. We tackle oppression. We will face it. We are internationalists. We need to push back on some of this very disturbing kind of rhetoric, especially around the anti-war movement currently. And we need to show solidarity because, like James said, at some point it will come back to you. You show it and it will come back to you.
Thanks, Laura. And I think there's actually, like, looking at chat, there's a lot more agreement than you might think. Like someone's just said, organising within workplaces and communities is the only way at the moment. No one Westminster saviour is coming. Some people talking about lessons we can learn from some of the left movements in Latin America, which are organised in a slightly different way. We're sort of coming towards the end of our time, but I think it's been an interesting discussion. So I'm going to go back to our speakers again. Just a few announcements before I do. First, the next Lefty Lunchtime session is on Tuesday on Labour movement strategy during the crisis. And that's Simon Fletcher, who a lot of you will know, columnist and many different roles in the Labour movement over the years, in conversation with two General Secretaries, Dave Ward, the CW General Secretary, and Joe Grady of the UCU, chaired by Beth Winter MP. So I'd recommend people tune into that. The next big evening session at Arise is the Labour in Palestine's rally. Now is the time to speak up for Palestine, which I see hundreds of people have already registered for, and that's with a Palestinian ambassador, MPs, Belrabir Adi, Kim Johnson, and a lot of speakers from unions as well. So please don't miss that rally. And as I said at the start, please do both buy a ticket for the festival as a whole and donate to Rise. These things cost a lot more to put on, even being based on volunteers, than people might realise. So it really does make a difference if you can donate £10 or anything. I know it's hard out there, but if you can donate, please do. I'm going to go for some closing remarks, but I'm just going to do it the other way around. So if we have Laura for like a minute or so now and then straight to James, and then we'll close things up.
Yeah, I'd probably only add to it. One, Matt, I think there should be more lunch at these lunchtime events. That would be my suggestion. But I think what we're seeing, as James pointed out at the start, is this has been since the crash in 2008. We're seeing, I believe, the death of something, and something new can come out of it, and we need to get very organised as to what that new thing looks like, and we can be the ones who shape that, and we should be the ones who shape that, because there are far more of us feeling like we are than there are of the ruling class. And it's how we take people on that journey with us, how we get them to hear our side of it, how we get our solutions out there and bring them with us. That was where the movement previously, it was kind of built on sand. We hadn't had enough time to organise, to get the groundwork going on some of the policies that we knew which would really change the lives and outcomes for people. So yeah, I want to see more and more people flexing their muscles at demonstrations, etc. But I also think it's the action part of it, how we organise in our communities, how we can link up, network together and keep positive and pushing. And the only other thing I'll say is on the comment that was made earlier, the question regarding how do people do it when they're struggling so much, when and that's a really good point. And I think we need to keep that at the forefront of our minds, that for many people this is going to be a disastrous period of time. We need to be linking in with each other, helping each other out as much as we can, and just be aware that as this awful legislation has been passed in Parliament, it is going to be harder to do things like protest. And it's not people can't just go out and get arrested when they're relying on wages and jobs, and it's not as simple as that. So we need to think through what we ask of people, the kind of action that we're taking, and make sure that there's lots of solidarity and love and support there.
Thanks, Laura. And final word to James.
Well, I completely agree with everything that Laura just said. I think our task is to extend solidarity and build power, and we do that wherever we are, whether that's joining a trade union, being active in our trade union, supporting people in the local mutual aid group, joining a tenants union and organising other tenants, joining a climate direct action group, whatever it is. Our job is to build power, because now is not the moment for us to scale back our ambitions. We don't have the time, and the need is so great. And it's not just that, it's also that our opponents are actually really weak. They don't have any answers either. It's not like we're up against a kind of functioning neoliberal juggernaut, which is able to eke out some economic growth and get some people to support the system. Right now, we are seeing around the world climate shocks, rising debt, inequality, and energy costs skyrocketing. And these are hard barriers to the existing system's viability. So it may not be absolutely clear through which way that history will zig and zag and move around, but we should know that if we can build power and we prepare to seize the moment, then we really can win and we really can change the world.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Laura. That's this lunchtime session done. Hope to see people at the streaming event Sunday, at the Rally Monday night, and of course the next lunchtime session on next Tuesday. Thank you, everyone, for your support.
And order James's book.
Oh yes, and order multiple copies of James's book. Thank you.